13 of Genesis. Sorry, I'm tired today. I did not sleep particularly well last night. But we're going to be, we ended in chapter 13 around where Lot and Abram are having some contention. The herdsmen are having some contentions. And we talked about how Abram had returned from Egypt, how he had returned to the place where it all began, essentially, where he had first established his tents in the land of Canaan, the promised land that God had given him. And we see here that Lot his nephew had followed Abram out of Ur, followed him out of the land of the Chaldee into Canaan. I find it kind of interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but God, when he commanded Abram to set out originally, set him apart, he commanded Abram to leave all his family behind. And for some reason, a nephew tagged along. I don't know whether they were really close or what the reason was for that, or Lot. It's not necessarily that Abram disobeyed in doing anything like that, allowing Lot to come along. Maybe Lot was also a believer in Yahweh and was convinced of it and decided to throw his lot in with Abram. We don't know what all the details of their relationship are, but what we do know is by the time Abram had returned from Egypt and their flocks began to graze in Canaan, that there wasn't enough forage for all of their flocks, and that led to strife. Because there's also Canaanites and Perizzites there as well in verse 7, and they're very parasitical, instead of parasitical. They're very parasitical, and I'm sure they use those lands for grazing and stuff too. So there just wasn't enough to go around. So then let's pick up in verse 8. Abram does, he notices this conflict. And one thing I think is interesting is he doesn't avoid the conflict. He actually addresses it in a healthy way. I think very oftentimes conflict is going to arise in families and churches, etc., and societies and cultures. And it's not whether conflict arises, but when it arises. And how you deal with conflict is directly related to your relationship, not just with the other people, but with God. And we see here that Abram is, at least it seems to me, is more spiritually mature in this situation. He actually goes to Lot, addresses him, and he's very reasonable. He says, "Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. And if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest into Zoar. So we see here that Abram is very reasonable. He says, listen, I just want this conflict to end. I'm willing to give up, because think about it. Abram is probably more affluent than Lot. He's probably older and more established. he could very well just say, separate yourself from me. I'm going to take what the Lord has promised me, and you go do your own thing. He could have just said, get. You know what I mean? Abram actually humbles himself and says, listen, your pick. Whichever way you want to go. You go over here, I'll go over here. You want the best land? I'll go over here. Abram is not in no ways making their relationship conditional upon material things. He's elevating the relationship above his material well-being or possessions or affluence, which shows that one thing that I find interesting throughout all of Abram's life and later Abraham, when he's renamed, is that despite being rich, especially for that day, he would be a prince, basically, in wealth. He had hundreds of trained servants who were trained to fight. That's what that means. They're men of war. He had the promised land was given to him, or at least was promised to him and his descendants. He had herds, he had flocks, he had trained servants, he had household servants, he had maidens, he had men servants, etc. He had a lot of wealth, and I'm sure he had gold and silver and things like that, and weapons and to equip his men, and he had a lot of wealth. He had a lot of wealth. But it never seems like Abram lets that wealth control him. He seems to be, to me at least, from reading the story of Abram, he seems to actually be a very good steward of what he's been given for the most part. And he uses it, even as we'll see later, he uses even his wealth and his influence in the region to even help Lot later on. So I think it's a good lesson for us is that Abram is not possessed by his possessions. But what does Lot in verse 10 and 11? It seems like Lot's heart is in a different place, right? Because what does he do? What does Lot do? Whenever Abram gives him this proposition, what does Lot do? How does he react to Abram's largesse here? Abram's humility. Yes. So isn't this interesting? The weaker member in this dynamic, or the stronger member in this dynamic, is humbling himself to the weaker. And then the weaker is taking advantage of the situation. Also, what I find interesting is one thing, a cultural dynamic we tend to forget, is in the ancient Near East, they have a lot of different, and even today in the Middle East in certain areas, they have a different mentality about, or at least there's etiquette involved with generosity and things like that, right? So it's like, please take this for my family, or from my family to yours. It's like, no, I couldn't. No, I can't take that. There's like this back and forth thing, right? And that was very common. You even find that in clay tablets of the day and stuff of discourses between nobles or family members or whatever, of like, please, I will give you all these things. It's like, no, please do not give me all these things. And just going back and forth, right? Lot is just like, sure. So it kind of shows where his heart was, right? He didn't show any deference towards Abram and his position. Remember, God spoke directly to Abram. God gave the promise to Abram. God blessed Abram, even though he was disobedient in Egypt. He still blessed him to show that God was in control of all these things. And yet, Lot jumps at a chance for profit. I think that's something interesting. It's like, very frequently, it's not only during times of trial where your true character comes out. even some pretty the survival instinct is very ingrained in humanity, okay? And like if you read stories of either concentration camps or the Soviet Union, the work camps and stuff in Siberia and other situations, the gulags. What's interesting is there's like good people and Christians and stuff who persevere through those times, but very frequently there's actually even evil people who persevere through those times through backstabbing and blah blah blah, and they manage to survive too. So it's not just your character is shown during times of adversity. It's actually, I think, a better show of character is how you handle plenitude. How do you handle abundance? Do you fall away from God whenever you're blessed? Do your true character shows through whenever there's a potential for gain at taking place, right? Very often, if people have no other, if there's no incentive in place, a lot of people can get along to get along, right? Like even people who are selfish can very frequently kind of sublimate that a little bit and be like, okay, I'll just get along and make sure, because there's people watching me or there's like systems in place to counterbalance it. But whenever those checks are removed, that's how that's how you can tell the character of a person, is whenever they have no other, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no restraints, huh? There's no distractions or restraints put in place. How are you going to react? And I think that's what we see with Lot. We see his character. Not to say that he was a thoroughly unrighteous man or anything like that. I don't think he was. But we see what he struggles with, right? He struggles with worldliness. Yeah. Oh, hold on. I got a thing. Sorry. Yeah, just yell it.
I was just going to say that Lot was actually righteous. We have that in 2 Peter 2:9,
right.
And it calls out that he was a righteous man and his soul was vexed. But
his soul was vexed.
The other thing too that I'd point out, I think Abram doing what he did, is sort of an act of servant leadership, and it's a precursor to what Christ did. Christ did something much bigger than he did, but that was kind of, and you see this in all of these leaders where they actually serve those. Even though they're in a position where they could go the other way.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. This is another type of Christ that is being highlighted here, or foreshadowing of what Christ-like leadership is. I think that's a great example. Let's see here. Yeah, so Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest into Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan. And Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. So what's interesting is we actually don't have a lot of archaeological residue left of these cities of the plain, right? And for years and years, especially in the 1800s, textual critics and stuff said, "Oh, this place never existed. This wasn't a real civilization. This was, this is basically mythological, yada, yada." Well, what's interesting is, there have been some archaeological discoveries of certain regions in the Dead Sea area that are very compelling, that this was at one point a very fertile area and a very well-watered area. And now it's basically just a big salt lick. It's just a big salt plain. And they have found what they first thought were just like cliff formations and stuff, but now they are actually, there's increasing evidence that some of these formations that they have found are actually just like basically melted buildings that have just become, they were clay brick buildings that became so superheated that they fused and just became like, now they just look like a natural rock formation. They basically turned back into rock from intense heat, multiple thousands degree heat. They've also excavated, some remains in that area, human remains, and other like maybe animal bones, they don't know, that have been basically turned to glass from heat. Like they've just become so superheated that the only way that they could, that scientifically, that these remains could be, turned into that would basically be put into a superheated furnace, but then also buried very quickly, so that way they didn't just turn into ash. It's very interesting. So they have found like brimstones actually lodged in these structures. They're actually like, you can pluck them out with like a knife, and they're actually little balls of sulfur that, so sulfur, whenever it burns, I don't know all the chemical reactions, but apparently whenever sulfur burns and then is snuffed out quickly, there's like some type of, it reverts into a simpler form or something. I don't remember. But what's interesting is they've actually found these sulfur balls, and we'll get into more of that later. But I just thought it was interesting that Lot chose to go into a city. He didn't even consider the ramifications of his decision besides the obvious, right? So there's always going to be an obvious, result towards a decision, but he didn't think about the second or third order consequences of his decision in going into this area. I thought that was interesting. So we'll see. Let's see here. So yeah, so Abram's offer was generous. Yeah. Oh, Jane.
I always thought that Lot was part of Abram's household. He was probably an orphan and, of course, younger. So then he saw community down there, and that's where he found a wife.
Maybe. We don't know. Oh, yeah, I'm talking about the orphan and stuff like that. We don't know. But, yeah. Whenever, let's see here. So Lot made his choice purely based on what he could see with his eyes. He cared only for the material abundance in land, was not concerned for how it might spiritually impact him and his family. How does this affect us today? Are there situations where, as a Christian, we can be excited about a decision or be excited about maybe some potential payout or something, and only think about how that will materially bless us, but not about how that may spiritually affect us, right? Has anyone experienced anything like that? Has anyone been put in a situation like that? Oh, yeah, we have a mic.
That's a new development. I didn't know about the mic. Love it. Yeah. I mean, we talk all the time about how, like, spiritually, some of the worst things you can be is comfortable. Mm-hmm. But humanly, that's what we want. We always want comfortability. I mean, I found that at Alabama, like, I have such a great church group, and I have, like, church something almost every night. Mm-hmm. That, like, it's kind of like, sometimes it's just second nature. And it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to the Bible study. Now what are we eating? Mm-hmm. It's comfortable. Mm-hmm. But, I don't know, I'm excited about after school and stuff, going out and not being in a spot where I'm, like, super spiritually nurtured. Because, I don't know, that can, like, push me out of our shell. But, like, I feel like I'm going on a tangent.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
But comfortability.
Yeah, comfortability. It's a temptation in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. And we can become spiritually comfortable. That's definitely true. I think sometimes, so, I know for me, any time in my life where I've been facing a challenge or a tribulation, it actually was better for me to lean into it and to embrace the suck, as it's called in the military. When you're going through like training, basic training or SEALs training or whatever, they have that phrase, embrace the suck. It's going to suck, just embrace it. And it is ironic that the more you lean in, actually then the better the outcomes are than if you try to avoid. If you try to avoid, be passive aggressive in relationships or anything, or passive in your relationships, passive in your finances, passive in your career moves, passive in anything in life, your spiritual formation, just go with the flow, means that you're usually going to atrophy. Those things are actually going to fall apart faster than if you lean into the difficult moments, lean into the difficult relationships, lean into the difficult financial situations and really apply yourself. Very often, you actually find that God equips you to be able to handle it better, and you learn from it and come through the other side better.
I think it's interesting that God actually longs for us to be comfortable.
Yeah, in Him.
But it's a different, we as humans look for comfort as an objective, and God wants us to have comfort as an outcome.
Right.
And he says, just, find comfort and dwell in it in everything, right? That's James 1. And it's not actually something we seek in the sense that, like Jolie described it, it's actually the outcome of the relationship with God in any situation.
Right. Yeah, His rest.
Also, I wanted to mention that you could be a righteous person and make foolish choices, or be wise and make foolish choices. Look at Solomon. But what he did, and I don't believe that they were ignorant of the fact that it wasn't just Sodom and Gomorrah that was exceedingly wicked, but also the cities of the plain.
Yeah, all the cities in that region.
Because
it was a civilization.
Jude says that they, in like manner as Sodom and Gomorrah, had given themselves over to fornication. So he purposefully put his family in the proximity of people that were exceedingly wicked, and it had a disastrous effect.
Yeah, I mean, the older I get, it's kind of funny, you kind of experience every stage as you age, where it's like whenever you're young, I looked at a lot of proverbs, cultural proverbs, as kind of like, oh, that's simplistic, that's not really true. Then as you age, you're like, no, it's definitely true. Bad company corrupts good morals. Whenever I was younger, some of the people I hung out with in college, I was like, oh, they're just an acquaintance. They don't really have an effect on me, but they did. We knew that every time you came home. Yeah, but they did. And then, or maybe today, it's not just interpersonal, like real life relationships, but what media you're consuming online. What are you reading? What are you consuming? Where is your news coming from, etc.? That's going to affect how you think about things. Even if you try to be objective, even if you try to make up your own mind about things, the voices you listen to are going to affect you. They're going to affect your outlook on life, your worldview, etc. Blah, blah, blah. Even how you react to other people towards about certain things. I've experienced it. I think we all have. So I think that's an interesting point that this wasn't a decision out of ignorance. You're right. This was a decision. He looked at it, he said, a bunch of wealth and potential for growth, but a spiritually depraved civilization. I'll take the wealth. So I think there's a lot of things like that we have to be careful about as Christians. Sometimes that may mean passing on a job that is, man, it could be really, really financially blessing for us, a real financial blessing for us. But man, I'm going to be gone from the home for most of the time, and my kids are going to suffer from it, and my wife is going to suffer from it, and et cetera, et cetera. There's all kind of trade-offs to life. I think another proverb, and I think it's from Thomas Sowell, is definitely true, is that, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And as Christians, we have to be aware of that reality. It's that there's always going to be a trade-off. And so we have to be careful in our choosing, and use wisdom, but most of all, seek out God's will. It's so funny. I was driving back from Mom and Dad's yesterday with Evelyn in the back seat, and it was nice just to, get to spend a little time with her, and we were talking, and I asked her, I was like, how are you doing and stuff lately and everything? She's like, sometimes I worry. She's like, well, that I might do something wrong in the future, like whenever I'm grown. I'm like, well, Evelyn, if you ever do anything wrong now, I guarantee you do something wrong in the future. She's like, well, I just don't want to make the wrong choice about like maybe a husband or a job or something. I was like, Evelyn, it's like, you don't have to worry about those things, because as long as you follow God's word and listen to wise people who have a lot more experience than you in these matters, and, just listen to, like I said, listen to God's word about things. It's like you don't have to worry about making the wrong choice. If you actually want to please God and serve others, love God, love your neighbor, those are the things that God worries about, or that God cares about the most. And so if you do those things, everything else just flows from that. And she was like, oh, okay. I don't know how much that got through to her, but it is kind of interesting how even a child can think about these things and be like, I want to make the right choice. It was kind of convicting to me. It's like, how often do I actually sit and think about the choices I make, the future choices I make, not just in the moment, but actually have that concern about wanting to please God and do the right thing, from before it even happens, before I'm even confronted with that choice. So it's kind of convicting, that kind of simple childlike faith on display of like, I don't want to make the wrong choice. I want to do what's right, even before she's confronted with those choices. So it was convicting to me. Let's see. So we do know that believers do not walk by what they see, but what they know to be true in God. For we walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. Abram walked by faith. Lot walked, in this instance at least, only by sight, at least in this decision. He pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. At this point, Lot's tent was merely in the direction of the wicked city of Sodom. Later, what happens? So at this point, he's only pitched his tent in the direction of Sodom. But later in this narrative, we see what happens. Where does Lot live later? In Sodom. Yeah, he lives actually in the city proper, within the walls. I find that interesting, right? So here's a herdsman, culturally and ethnically, a herdsman, nomadic, which has kind of your provision is from the Lord in that dynamic, right? A herdsman is dependent upon God's good earth, right? If there's grass, we have herds. If there's no grass, we have to move. If our flock is multiplying, it's because God is blessing my flock. If it's not, I have to change tack here, right? So I find it interesting that we keep seeing this pattern of just like with Cain and Abel, and now we have Lot and Abram. There's almost like a lifestyle or consequences to the lifestyle you choose. And he's not allowing God's provision to lead to comfort, like it's not an outcome like Dad was saying. He's actually seeking it out. Because it must have been inconvenient to take all your herds into market and then have to travel all the way back afterwards. If you have a dealing with somebody for something inside the city, you have to travel and then come back, and blah, blah. It's very inconvenient. So I'm sure he rationalized it in his mind. This is more efficient. I'm going to just live where the action is, live near the market, and then I'll have access to this market. Everything will be more efficient. I'll make more profit. I can still have herds outside the city with other people taking care of them, or maybe he changed tack and became a merchant. We don't know what exactly how he made a profit in the city, but we see that he moved in closer. I find that interesting in our own lives. Don't you find it interesting that whenever you're kind of on the peripheral of sin, you're not actually going headlong into it, but you're just close enough to it that it's enticing, how it's like a magnet. It will inevitably draw you closer and closer to it. I think that's why it's so important that Paul and Jesus said to flee from temptation, to flee from it, to run. Just like with Joseph, as we'll see later, he fled from Potiphar's wife, right? He didn't entertain the notion. And anytime I've gotten in trouble with sin, it's because I'm entertaining the notion. I'm not fleeing from it. I'm not pursuing righteousness and fleeing from unrighteousness. I'm kind of trying to dwell in the direction. I'm pitching my tent on the outskirts of Sodom. But I'm not in it. But then inevitably, the enticement is too great, right? I think that's an interesting dynamic about this story. I think I've mentioned it before. They've done the marshmallow study with kids. You've probably heard about this. The researchers put a marshmallow in front of kids, and they say, it's like one of those jumbo marshmallows, like, if you don't eat this for 30 minutes, you'll get 2 marshmallows. Or maybe even be shorter. I think it was like 10 minutes or something. It wasn't very long. 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Like, if you don't eat it for 10 minutes, you get a second marshmallow. And, vast majority of the kids don't make it. They may start and they're just sitting there looking at it. And they're look at the clock, look, and they can't. It's just arduous. They just can't do it. And some of them pick it up and they look at it. And they lick it. And then they put it down. Then they touch it. And they keep fondling it. And then eventually they give up after like a couple minutes, right? They just, no. And you know what's funny? The researchers found it was the children who had, they had higher time preference. But besides that, or lower time preference, I should say. But besides that, it was the children who actually found a way to distract themselves during those 10 minutes or whatever that were the ones who succeeded. The ones who didn't look at it. Some of them, one little girl apparently took the marshmallow because it was sitting on like a plate. She actually took the marshmallow, put it underneath the plate, and set the plate on top of it, and walked away from it and started like just singing a song or something and just walking around the room. Other kids would like distract themselves by like going off and draw or something else, or they would do something to occupy their time and their mind. So then the time passed faster, and they came back and they got 2 marshmallows. So I think that's really interesting that God will always give us, we always have the opportunity, I should say, we always have the opportunity to do the right thing. And yeah, I think it's just interesting that humanity just remains the same throughout history. We struggle with the same things. Let's see here. Yeah. This is one thing I wonder about. Do you wonder if Lot justified his decision about moving into Sodom? I wonder if he thought, I can serve God just as well in Sodom as anywhere else. They probably need a witness there. However, Lot, if he thought this way, he would have deceived himself, as many since him have done. And it is common to trust a deceitful heart, Jeremiah 17:9. I often wonder that, because I see that. I saw that with a lot of my friends in college, who they were not super strong Christians. They were kind of cultural Christians. They had no no faith that was rock solid. It was more just convenient faith or inherited. But they fooled themselves into purposely going into situations or relationship dynamics or locations that had the potential for spiritual compromise. And along the way, they said, I'll be a witness there. How often do we use that excuse? I think the more you become spiritually mature, the more you learn to distrust your flesh. The more you learn to humble yourself and realize, actually, I'm not strong enough for this. Instead of saying, oh, I can tackle that. That's no biggie. I think a spiritually mature person says, no, that's going to put me in a compromising position. I'm not even going to entertain that. I'm actually not going to go there. Even just to avoid the appearance of evil, I'm not going to go there. It seems Lot had no such concern. All right. So then Abram, in this interaction, he fulfilled the New Testament principle of love. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Philippians 2:4. Abram knew that whatever Lot chose, God would make sure Abram prospered. He was relying upon God. He was relying upon God's providential care. In Egypt, Abram thought he had to take his fate into his own hands and protect himself. Here, he was wiser and willing to let God look out for his interests. Right or left, it didn't matter to Abram because God would be there. Because he trusted in God, there were times when Abram surrendered his rights. The believer will also have such times when rights should be surrendered for the glory of God and the furtherance of the gospel. And there's tons of examples of that. Let's see. In the end, he who sought this world lost it, and he who was willing to give up anything for the honor of God found it. I think that's what the main point I want to drive home here is that very often the thing you strive for is not always the best thing for you. And trusting in God is willing to give up anything that God asks you to give up. And Abram demonstrated that faith in this instance. And then later in verse 14 and 15, God confirms his promise to Abram. It's almost like God he's giving him another chance here. God is giving Abram another chance to make the right choice. Abram does. And then God confirms his promise. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. So God is saying, great, you came back. You're back to the beginning place, where you first built your altar to worship me and call upon my name. Now you made a good choice with your nephew Lot. Now I got work for you to do. Walk through this land. The comfort and the peace that I'm going to give you from this land, I want you to experience all of it. Know the width and breadth and depth and height of my love for you. And I think that's what's interesting. You know, God is so eager to bless his people. He wants to give us abundance. I do believe that. I think it's been perverted. I think that truth has been perverted at times by prosperity gospel stuff and everything. But prosperity is not a dirty word. God actually does want to prosper us. Now, that may look different depending on the individual, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he wants us to be, the next Bill Gates or something like that, necessarily. But God is eager to bless. He's eager to give abundantly. He's eager to prosper us. This is true of his character. I mean, what father wouldn't want to do that for his children? I struggle. One of my big struggles with my kids is I feel like I go too easy on them. Sometimes they're like, can we stop for ice cream or something like that? And it's been a hot day, and they've been not too bad, and everything. And then I'm like, oh, sure, ice cream. It's only like a few bucks, and I feel like I'm maybe a little too, what? Doting, yeah. Maybe a little bit too much. Fletcher's like, yesterday, he's like, I really want this VIP pass for Minecraft or something. I'm like, what? And I'm like, what is that? So he explained it to me, showed it, everything. I was like, oh, no. And at first I was just going to say no. But then I was like, okay, fine. If you mow Nathan and Birdie's backyard for them, I'll buy the VIP pass for you. And he's like, really? I was like, yes. So he goes out there, he mows, keeps a pretty good attitude about it. And he comes back in. He's all hot and sweaty. And so I buy it for him. And he's like, oh, thanks, Dad, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, did I make the right choice? Do I really want to encourage this? You know what I mean? Like, encourage. But then I was like, I'd rather, what? I know. But that's the thing that's the point I'm trying to make is that if a feeble, broken, sinful man have struggled with wanting to shower blessings on my children, how much more does the perfect, loving, righteous God desire to bless us?
You're just overcompensating from your father at all.
I don't feel like that. But what? Yeah, you got some. Oh, battery's out. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've kind of noticed over the years with God prospering us is, in his perfect love, he only prospers us as far as we're able to handle it.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of reminds me of James talking about you ask, but you ask amiss.
Mm-hmm.
You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, are we asking amiss, wanting to spend things on our own lust? Or are we rather trusting our Heavenly Father in that
Right.
He will provide for us, and He will give us the desires of our heart if we delight in Him?
Yeah. 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 Again, it's the outcome of the right relationship, not the pursuing of it for its own sake. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. So that was just something I wanted to end on. Was like trying to dispel this notion of, I think sometimes we tend to impoverish our relationship with God. It's like, oh, God's punishing me. He's chastising me. He's doing these things. Well, yeah, there might be a chastisement going on, but it's so brief and temporary compared to the abundance that God, it's always for a purpose of blessing. It's always for a purpose of blessing. He wants us to experience any hardships or trials or tribulations for the purpose of getting through it, so that way so then we can handle the blessings that may come from such a thing. Because otherwise, it may be too much for us.
You know, and just thinking of my life retrospectively, I think that discipline, that chastisement, will last only so long as it takes for you to get to the point where God is pleased. And like, think of it as kind of like stepping stones to where God wants you to be in life and to end up, which is ultimately with Him.
Yes.
And sometimes those periods can be long, you know, in the grand scheme of things, they're not long at all, but it's going to seem long to you. Yeah. And, you know, I just, you know, I've looked back many times in my life where it's just, you know, I went going through stuff, but looking back, it's like, well, I'm glad I went through that. I would not be here today if I didn't go through that. Yeah. So sometimes it takes a while, but yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Yep. God is always so eager to get us to that next level. If we let Him, if we allow Him to do the work in us. All right. Thank you so much.